So in biology, we are worried about chemical reactions and molecules for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that our molecules all come together to build the components of our cells. So they're important in the structure and the function of our cells and our cellular components. The other reason that we're worried about atoms becoming molecules is because of our metabolism. So you might think of metabolism as all of the fat burning and muscle building, burning calories in your body. And that is absolutely what we mean. But we also mean the entire collection of chemical reactions that are happening within your cells and within your body. Now, that definitely means burning fat and building muscle, but it also means building proteins and building nucleic acids and maintaining the structures in our cells, building all of the components that are going to make our cells run. So in biology, we are worried about those molecules that are going to do all of those things. So later in the semester, we'll talk about cellular respiration, or the process of converting chemical energy into energy that can be used in the cell, or getting the energy out of our glucose molecules, out of our carbohydrates, and into usable forms that our cell can use. We're also going to talk about photosynthesis, where we bring in energy and lock it up in molecules. We're going to talk about how we build proteins and how we build, maintain, and transfer information with DNA. So all of that is important because of chemical reactions within our cells. So we need to start at the atomic and the molecular level in order to understand all of those different types of reactions. So an atom is going to bind with another atom or more than one atom to produce a molecule. So a molecule is any collection of two or more atoms that are bound together. And in a few minutes, we're going to talk about how those atoms come together. We might have a molecule such as hydrogen that is made up of two hydrogen atoms. Likewise, we might have an oxygen molecule that is made up of two oxygen atoms. Now, what I've written is the chemical formula. So the chemical formula contains the symbols of the elements that are within that molecule. So we've got an O for oxygen, and then we've also got a subscript number. Now that number just indicates how many molecules are present. Sometimes we're going to have a molecule that contains different types of atoms. When we have a molecule that contains different types of atoms, we call that a compound. So a molecule can be made up of the same atoms, or it can be made up of different atoms. So a compound is essentially a specific type of molecule. So if you're not 100% sure, go with molecule. But keep in mind that a molecule that has more than one type of atom is specifically a compound. So an example of that might be glucose. Glucose is made of 6 carbon, 12 hydrogen, and 6 oxygen. So this is our chemical formula for glucose. We've got carbon. We know that there are 6 of those because of that subscript there. Hydrogen, 12 of those. Oxygen, 6 of those. So we'll see several different types of chemical formulas throughout our semester. Just keep in mind that they're all written in the same way. We've got our symbol, and then we've got our number for how many are present in that particular atom. So in order to build molecules, we need to bring atoms together. Now, atoms are going to form bonds. They're going to come together when their valence electrons interact. The most stable type of bond is the covalent bond. The covalent bond is stable because our atoms share a pair of electrons. When our atoms have empty positions in their valence shells. They are unstable. If they can fill those valence shells with electrons, they are going to become much more stable, which means they're going to be less reactive. And so most of our biological molecules are going to be largely made of covalent bonds. These are going to be strong bonds that hold our atoms together. So this sharing happens when two atoms come near to one another and are able to fill their valence shell by pairing up those valence electrons. So there are different numbers of shared electrons that two atoms can use to fill their valence shells. They can share a single pair of electrons, and we can see that in two hydrogen atoms where they each bring in their single electron and share that electron. Now this is going to be written as a single bond, which is just denoted by a single dash between our two atoms. So we'll see this all over the place. So anytime you see a single line connecting two symbols for atoms, that just means that they're sharing one pair of electrons. Atoms can also share a pair of electrons. So for example, oxygen has two electrons that are unpaired. So one oxygen molecule can donate those two electrons. Another oxygen molecule can donate a pair and form what we call a double bond. So a double bond is a sharing of 4 total electrons. We can also share 3 pairs of electrons. Nitrogen is an example of an atom that will form a triple bond. It usually does it with itself, sharing 6 pairs of electrons. The most common that we will see are going to be these single bonds and these double bonds. Those triple bonds happen. We're not going to worry about them too much in our biology class. We're going to see some double bonds between oxygen molecules. We're also going to see double bonds that are really important between carbon molecules. So carbon can form a double bond with itself and with oxygen. That's not to say that other bonds can't happen, but those are the common ones that we're going to look at. We're going to look at those single bonds and double bonds with carbon. So here's an example of a covalent bond between a fluorine molecule and a hydrogen molecule. Now, fluorine has 9 protons, which means it's going to have 9 electrons. We've seen hydrogen a few times. Hydrogen has 1 proton and 1 electron. So you can see that we've got our shells drawn out. We've got those 9 protons. We've got 2 electrons in that first shell, and then we've got 7 electrons in the next shell, meaning there is 1 unpaired electron in fluorine's second shell. That is a valence electron. So we have 1 valence electron, which means we can form 1 bond. Hydrogen also has that 1 unpaired electron, which means he can form 1 bond. Hydrogen is very reactive because of that unpaired electron. So we'll see hydrogen a lot, just sort of filling up empty valence electrons. So for example, if carbon or oxygen is ever without an unpaired electron, hydrogen's probably going to come in and fill that role. So here we see it filling that role for fluorine. They're going to share this electron, which means it is forming a covalent bond to fill up that unpaired valence electron space in both of those atoms. Now notice that this is electrons being shared. Now what that means is that these electrons are attracted to the positive core of the fluorine and the positive core of the hydrogen atom, which means those electrons are essentially going to be buzzing around either one at any given time. And we're going to fill up our valence shells. We're going to form our chemical bonds based on something that we call the octet rule. And this is based on the idea that atoms are most stable when their outer shell is full. And remember, we said that we can get 2 electrons in that lower shell and 8 electrons in the shells past the first shell. So that's where we get this name, the octet rule. The octet rule says that atoms are most stable when all of their 8 available valence spaces are filled. In a covalent bond, that's going to be filled by sharing of electrons. And we can also gain or lose electrons in order to fulfill the octet rule. We'll see that in a little bit. So hydrogen is our weird exception because hydrogen has only 1 shell, which means it can only ever have 2 electrons. So the most that a hydrogen ion can ever make is 1 bond. And that's because it has 1 valence electron, so it can form 1 pair. Oxygen has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 electrons. You'll notice there are 2 unpaired electrons, which means that to fill up the 8 available valence electron spaces, in order to meet our octet rule, oxygen can form 2 bonds. Likewise, nitrogen has 3 unpaired electrons, which means it can form 3 bonds. And carbon, the most important of our organic molecules and the basis of all of our biological molecules, can actually form 4 bonds. And that's because carbon has only 6 electrons, which means that it has 4 unpaired because it's got 4 in that outer shell, but it can hold up to 8. So carbon is a hugely diverse molecule because it can form 4 bonds. Now, what that means is that it can form bonds with up to 4 different atoms at any given time. Doesn't mean it always will, but we're going to see a lot of carbon compounds because of those 4 unpaired valence electrons.